town of Mukaradzi was alive with the sound of industry. Miners shouted across the dusty roads, their bodies covered in a fine layer of gold dust and sweat. The air smelled of coal smoke and metal, the scent of hard labor mixing with the aroma of sizzling street food. As the sun dipped below the hills, the streets filled with hungry workers, all looking for a hot meal to end their exhausting day. Stalls lined the roads, some selling roasted maize, others frying kapenta fish in bubbling oil. But one restaurant stood out among them all, Gogo Mavis Kitchen. While other places charged $5 or even $10 for a meal, Gogo Mavis only asked for $1, and that $1 bought you a full plate, sadza, stew and vegetables served steaming hot. The miners called it a miracle. "How can she sell food so cheap?" people whispered. But no one questioned it too much. In a place where money was hard to come by, a cheap meal was a blessing. But was it really? One evening, a young miner named Tendai arrived in town. He was new to the mines, still getting used to the long hours and the weight of a pickaxe in his hands. His stomach rumbled as he walked down the dusty road, scanning the food stalls. Most of them were too expensive for him. Then he saw it, Gogo Mavis Kitchen, with a long line of hungry miners waiting for their turn. Curious, he turned to a fellow miner named Jabu, a tall man with calloused hands and a deep voice. "Why is this place so cheap?" Tendai asked. Jabu grinned. "No one knows. But the food is good. That's all that matters." Tendai hesitated for a moment. Cheap food could mean spoiled ingredients or bad cooking. But when the scent of the stew hit his nose, all doubts vanished. His stomach made the decision for him. He stepped into the line. Tendai finally reached the front and received a heavy plate filled with steaming sadza and thick stew. The vegetables looked fresh. The meat glistened in the sauce. He sat next to Jabu and took a big bite. At first it was delicious. The stew was rich, the spices just right. But then, something felt off. The meat was tender, but it had a strange aftertaste, a little too sweet. He frowned and looked at Jabu. "This meat tastes different." Jabu chuckled, shoving a large bite into his mouth. "Maybe it's goat. Who cares? It's food." Tendai nodded, but deep inside his unease grew. He had eaten goat before. This wasn't goat. Over the next few days, Tendai kept coming back to Gogo Mavis's kitchen. But something strange started happening. He never saw the same customers twice. Every day, new miners filled the benches, eating hungrily. But the men he had seen eating the day before, they never returned. At first, he thought maybe they were just busy. Maybe they had taken their wages and moved to another mining camp. But as the days turned into a week, the pattern became clear. One evening, Tendai finally gathered the courage to ask Gogo Mavis directly. "Gogo, your food is cheap and tasty, but I don't see the same people coming back. Where do they go?" She froze for a split second, her knife pausing as she chopped vegetables. Then she gave him a slow smile. "Maybe they went back to their villages." Her voice was calm, but something in her eyes made Tendai's skin crawl. That night, he couldn't sleep. Something was wrong, and he had to find out what it was. The full moon hung low in the sky as Tendai slipped out of his tiny rented room. The streets of Mukaradzi were quiet, the usual noise of miners and traders replaced by the eerie sound of crickets and distant owls. He crept toward Gogo Mavis's kitchen, hiding behind an old pile of coal sacks. The kitchen door opened. Out stepped Gogo Mavis, carrying a large black sack over her shoulder. She looked left, then right, as if making sure no one was watching. Then she started walking toward the old mine shaft. Tendai's heart pounded. He decided to follow her. Gogo Mavis moved quickly, her steps almost too fast for her old age. Tendai stayed low and silent, carefully stepping over rocks and twigs to avoid making noise.